Welcome back to The Real Story. Today's next topic brings us to the Middle East. A brazen missile attack by Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis has brought chaos to Israel's Ben Gurion airport, forcing major airlines such as Lufthansa, Air France, and even Delta to suspend flights to Tel Aviv. The strike, which happened on Sunday and evaded Israel's top-tier defense systems, injured 8 people and sent passengers scrambling for cover. And it also marked the first time a missile landed so close to Israel's main international airport, drawing a lot of concern from the global community. It led to temporary airport closures, heightened security concerns, and flight suspensions, with some suspensions extending through May 11th. And while airlines like Ethiopian, Fly Dubai, and Bluebird continued operations, many foreign carriers, which had only recently resumed flights after a January ceasefire with Hamas, canceled their services once again. Additionally, Houthi terrorists claim responsibility for the strike, declaring the airport no longer safe for air travel. And then they threatened to impose a comprehensive aerial blockade upon Israel, seemingly to express their opposition to Israel's operations in Gaza. Israeli carriers like El Al have stepped up, though, to fill the gap, with the company's stock soaring 7%. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed a fierce response. And to that point, this strike comes right as Israeli forces weigh an expanded military operation in the Gaza Strip. The country's security cabinet unanimously approved the operation, dubbed Gideon's Chariots, on Sunday evening, and it's aimed at defeating Hamas and securing the release of the remaining hostages. This plan involves mobilizing tens of thousands of reservists, and it would begin possibly as soon as next week, on May 15th, if a new ceasefire and hostage deal hasn't been reached with Hamas yet. And according to Axios, citing Israeli officials, Israeli forces, which already control about 1/3 of Gaza, would indefinitely reoccupy the region, and they would flatten any buildings that are still standing there, as well as destroying Hamas's tunnel networks on the ground. The Israeli military would also oversee aid distribution through private companies, bypassing UN agencies to prevent Hamas from accessing the supplies. What's more, nearly 2 million people in Gaza would be displaced to a humanitarian area near Rafah, where compounds for the delivery of humanitarian aid are currently being built. But despite the brutality displayed by Hamas in recent years, this plan has sparked controversy, with hostage families and groups like the Hostages and Missing Families Forum condemning it as risking captives' lives by prioritizing Hamas's defeat over their release. Nothing, of course, will happen until the end of President Trump's trip to the Middle East next week. But even still, concerns remain. And in the meantime, Israeli forces are taking other actions to protect their country. Case in point, Israel has already hit back against the Houthis following Sunday's attack, fully disabling Yemen's Sana'a International Airport and hitting power plants in a counterstrike, as confirmed by the Israeli military and Houthi media. Here with reaction is Davis Younts, a military defense attorney with Younts Law. Davis, thank you for joining me.
It's an honor, Riley.
So I have so many questions, but let's start here with the tit for tat between Hamas, the Houthis, and Israel. What do you make of this situation?
You know, it's a very complex situation that involves not just historic enemies, but also Iran funding the Houthis. So yes. Right now, the United States has been consistently engaging in precision strikes against these Houthi terrorists. And now Israel is looking at attacks by, again, all of this is a proxy war with Iran. So this is an extremely complex situation. It has a long history. And, you know, I am very pleased that this administration under President Trump is going to the Middle East, and they are going to be looking at how to bring in a ceasefire and come up with a solution to this. But again, we can't miss how complex this is and the fact that this is a historical problem. I mean, this goes all the way back to the shores of Tripoli and the Barbary Coast pirates. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here when we think about this. So, you know, the United States is actively engaged in airstrikes against Houthi terrorists that are trying to stop shipping. Israel has been facing a war for its survival. They're trying to secure the release of these hostages against what is a terrorist organization in Hamas. None of this is easy. None of this is simple. This has all been going on for a long time. But again, I think that there is hope that we have a president who is a strong leader, who's willing to go and engage and look look for solutions. So at least we can hope that there is calmer heads will prevail and that President Trump will be able to have an influence on these conflicts moving forward.
Having said that, then, Davis, what do you make of these plans to indefinitely go back into Gaza, take over the whole place, flatten buildings, look for these tunnel networks that Hamas uses? Do you think that's a wise idea or maybe not, and why?
You know, the challenge that Israel faces really is a question about their right to exist as a nation, their right to exist as people. When we're dealing with the Palestinian people in Gaza and dealing with Hamas, this was the elected, a terrorist organization was the elected leaders of these people. And we have individuals that are committed to even sacrificing their own lives simply to kill people they perceive as Jewish or enemies of Islam. So this is an existential threat to the existence of the nation of Israel. And so they have to be very sober-minded in seeking a solution to this. And one of the big problems is no other Middle Eastern country has ever been willing to take in these people and provide space for them in their own land. Instead, the world, particularly Middle Eastern countries, have forced Israel to live right next to and have as neighbors people who deny their right to exist, to live, to breathe free air. So I don't like the idea of an ongoing conflict. I would hate to see this because there will be a toll and civilians will be killed if they do this. But we have to understand Israel faces an existential crisis. It's a very fight for their existence. And if other countries in the Middle East are not willing to step up and allow resettlement of these people, we're going to continue to have this. Because again, Israel were the ones that were attacked. It was Israeli children, women, children, American women and children that were viciously killed, tortured, and have been held mercilessly. And at some point, Israel has to come up with solutions that are more permanent. They cannot continue to exist under a constant threat of terrorist attack.
Completely. Spot on. And so I think that's the real tightrope here is, on one hand, nobody wants more war, but on the same time, you can't just make peace with a genocidal terrorist organization that actively wants to wipe your country off the face of the earth. But then that brings us back to Iran, which is really behind so much of what's going on right here. Iran denies ordering any Houthi attacks, and they've, told the Houthis reportedly to de-escalate tensions in recent months. And yet here we are, tensions escalating between the U.S. and the Houthis, and now between Israel and the Houthis. What do you think about the Iran factor here and the fact that we have this all going on while the U.S. is actively talking to them about their nuclear program?
So one of the challenges that Iran faces, if they're going to be accurate in their assessment of their stance on the international stage, is one of the problems they're seeing is, if we take even for a moment that it's true that Iran has asked the Houthis to calm down, they created this problem, right? So we have to understand from a geopolitical standpoint, by funding this terrorist organization, by funding these radical extremists, they're now in a situation where they may not be able to fully turn off that war machine, if you will. So that may be a challenge to them, because it would seem to be in their best interest from a geopolitical perspective to negotiate in good faith with the United States and the rest of the world so that a peaceful agreement can be reached that everyone can live with. But they seem to be either unwilling to do that because they're being duplicitous in their funding of the Houthis, or simply they're in a situation where when you fund violent extremist terrorists, it can be very difficult to get them to stop doing what they're doing once you've funded them.
Okay, very interesting. Then I want to look back to Gaza for a moment, because I'm not sure what happens for Gazans or for that region in terms of who's going to run it. So let's fast forward 5-10 years from now. The war presumably is over with Hamas. What do you think is going to happen with Gaza? Well, let me back up actually. What do you think should happen with that region?
So unfortunately, a two-state solution has never presented itself as a reasonable option, because the people that live in that region have continually voted for to be led by essentially terrorist organizations. And again, the majority of people living in that region have denied Israel's right to exist. They are committed to the destruction and the death of Israel as a nation. So long as there is an ideology that wants genocide and will deny the existence of the state of Israel, it will be very, very difficult for there to be a two-state solution. So I do think there may have to be some sort of a movement, a resettlement of people out of there. And again, there are Middle Eastern countries that you would think share religion and share some level of cultural ties to the Palestinian people that would allow them to be folded in and participate in their government. But every time the world stage or Israel has conceded to self-determination for Gaza, it has resulted in elections that elect terrorists as leaders, and it has resulted in opportunities for these individuals to take advantage of that peace and position themselves to attack and kill Israelis. So that's why a two-state solution may never be a likely solution. So we have to look for new things, new ideas, creative ways to do this. And unfortunately, it's a horrible thing to have to say, but I do think it's going to have to involve some level of resettlement into other nations until the people that live there are going to be willing to recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation.
Davis, you were so right. Nothing about the situation is ideal. It's really tragic and heartbreaking, but I completely understand where the IDF is coming from, and we'll see what happens in the days and weeks ahead. For all we know, they may come to a ceasefire, a deal with Hamas once again sometime next week while Trump is in the region. We'll have to see. I'm really hoping and praying for that very much so, but as you said also earlier, it's just really complicated and it's hard to say what's going to go on. So in the meantime, I'm just going to be patient and hope and pray for peace in the region and some stability.
Yeah, absolutely. Pray for peace is not just a sentiment. That's what we need. God has to intervene if we're going to see a permanent solution here.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Take care.
Left to men like Davis Younts fighting for these Navy SEALs.
Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval